CCP plays power broker at UN Climate Summit. Commentary. Belém, Brazil. The big winner of the annual United Nations Climate Summit this year was not the global climate, it was the Chinese Communist Party. But not for the reasons the media claim. More than 50 years after replacing the Free Republic of China at the UN, the CCP was the star of the show at the UN's annual climate summit. Between making deals to export more green gimmicks and providing global leadership, the CCP was clearly calling the shots. The 30th annual Conference of the Parties even featured a sort of mascot donated by the CCP, a hideous dragon jaguar guardian spirit statue complete with devil horns. Brazilian Christians were outraged. But the real story of the COP30 is the ongoing reshuffling of global economic power away from the once dominant West and toward communist China and its allies. From foisting more economic carnage on Western economies to creating more demand for Chinese-made green junk mandated by Western governments and subsidized by Western taxpayers, the CCP is laughing all the way to the bank. Throughout the summit, legions of smiling CCP functionaries handed out cute stuffed panda bears and Xi Jinping books as climate dignitaries, activists, and journalists buzzed around the regime's colossal COP30 booth. Strategically located right by the entrance of the summit, the CCP's giant bootprint at COP30 cast a dark shadow over the whole process. CCP diplomats worked hard to secure a global agreement that will boost the regime's own economic prospects at the expense of what used to be known as the free world. And for this, the CCP was showered with endless praise about its supposedly visionary multilateral climate leadership. But the reality is that the CCP's carbon footprint is far larger than the entire Western world combined, and by many accounts, still expanding. Meanwhile, under the guise of saving the climate, Western governments are handicapping and dismantling what is left of their own energy systems and economies. The middle class is being decimated. The CCP is cheering it all along as the regime absorbs the productive capacity, jobs, and economic prowess being shifted out of the West. As U.S. President Donald Trump famously warned on Twitter in 2012, the global warming narrative was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. If that was the plan, it's certainly working, and COP30 proved it. This writer has been attending UN climate summits for 15 years for the New American magazine. The CCP influence has never been so blatant. Global praise for CCP climate leadership. World leaders, activists, and journalists fawned over the CCP's supposedly enlightened climate leadership, especially amid the U.S. government's boycott of the summit. Incredibly, despite the CCP emitting about 3 times as much CO2 as the United States, COP30 CEO Anna Detoni could barely contain her enthusiasm. China has shown leadership not only by carrying out its own energy revolution, but with China's scale capacity, we can now also buy low carbon at competitive prices, she told foreign media, assuming that the facts would not be mentioned. China is very determined not only to continue to be a very stable leader in the Paris Agreement, strengthening climate governance, but also to take very practical actions to support other countries, she added. The government of Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva announced multiple deals with the CCP throughout the summit and praised Beijing's role in climate talks. Brazilian Minister of Environment and Climate Change Marina Silva told CCP News and intelligence agency Xinhua that China made a great contribution in the fight against climate change. Multiple diplomats and leading activists who spoke to this writer at the summit echoed those sentiments. Asked about the CCP's massive carbon footprint, Global Policy Campaign Manager Romain Iowalan with the Rockefeller Oil Dynasty-funded Oil Change International praised the regime and called for the West to phase out fossil fuels first. China is doing comparatively much more than the U.S. and many developed countries in trying to develop their economy to decarbonize their economy, he claimed, echoing a ubiquitous but false COP30 talking point. Let's also not forget about historical responsibility, added Iowalan. China started emitting a lot of CO2 the past 20 years. The Europeans and the Americans have emitted a lot of CO2 for the past 100 or 150 years. In any case, the West must commit economic suicide first, then the CCP might consider following. You need rich countries that still produce a lot of oil and gas, such as the United States, Canada, Norway, and Australia, to phase out first, Ayawalin said. Speaking to Reuters, one unnamed senior diplomat explained that China is acting as a guarantor of the climate regime. Indeed, even American politicians and media trumpeted the CCP as climate savior narrative. NBC, for instance, claimed that as the U.S. government steps back, China is stepping into the limelight as a leader in the fight against global warming. CCP diplomats, NBC added, are working behind the scenes to ensure constructive talks. California Governor Gavin Newsom, who attended the summit, agreed. China gets it, he said. The final deal, a boon to China at your expense. Unsurprisingly, the CCP was pleased with the outcome it helped engineer, known as the Global Mutareo Decision. CCP COP30 delegation boss Li Gao praised the hard-won global agreement for showing solidarity. It demonstrates the strong political will of all parties to work together in solidarity to address climate change, arguably deriding what he called rising unilateralism and protectionism by U.S. authorities. Gao and the mass-murdering regime he serves had literally trillions of reasons to celebrate the COP30 pact it helped create. Consider, for instance, that one of the big accomplishments was a commitment to tripling so-called climate adaptation funding. That is in addition to $1.3 trillion per year in wealth redistribution from Western taxpayers to third-world kleptocracies through a scheme dishonestly referred to as climate finance. It is easy to understand why CCP delegates would be so enthusiastic about the hard-won global deal. According to a recent analysis by The Guardian, vast sums of this so-called climate finance money are flowing from what is left of the middle class in the West too. You guessed it, Communist China. Another major win for the CCP is the reference in the COP30 agreement to a carbon budget for humanity, 4/5 of which has supposedly already been emitted. Because the United States and the West have already used up more than their fair share, the CCP and its allies must get most of what is left, climate dignitaries have argued for years. Now, the vision is enshrined in an official agreement. Another big boon to the CCP will be its ability to peddle more of its green energy scams, such as solar panels, windmills, and more, to the West. This has a double benefit for the CCP. It collects Western tax funds by selling junk nobody would buy in a free market, and it handicaps Western economies by making energy far more expensive than in China. Naturally, the factories producing the green junk in China will be powered mostly by coal and other hydrocarbon fuels. Under the latest addition to the climate regime negotiated in Belém, the flow of wealth and production from the West to China will continue to accelerate. That means the CCP will have more resources to continue its rapid militarization, even as the West undermines its own security. The CCP is also using the climate process to expand its diplomatic clout and soft power. None of these developments is new. At CP28, Western governments were tripping over themselves to phase out fossil fuels, a pledge they all agreed to in the final agreement that year. Despite agreeing to the language, the CCP and Arab governments were caught making oil deals at the summit. In short, Westerners are being played for fools as the CCP works to undermine U.S. dominance and bring about a multipolar world order. CCP's dragon spirit-sized carbon footprint. Ironically, despite being hailed as climate saviors, the CCP regime's victims already emit well over 1/3 of global CO2 emissions. That share is rising. According to the latest data from World Population Review, China produced more than 13.25 billion gigatons of CO2 in 2023, the last year for which data is available. The United States, by contrast, produced around 4.5 gigatons. But even that does not tell the full story. The CCP's victims emitted more than 0.42 tons of CO2 per $1,000 of GDP. The United States produced significantly less than half of that, the data showed. That same $1,000 of GDP for the American economy only resulted in less than 0.19 tons. Half of all the world's coal-powered electricity generation is in China, and there are no plans to rein that in. In the CCP's defense, though, it was open about its scheming. At the 2015 COP21 climate summit in Paris, the Obama administration unilaterally pledged to slash U.S. CO2 emissions by more than 25% by 2025. Other Western governments made similar promises. The CCP, by contrast, vowed to keep increasing its emissions for the next 15 years, perhaps peaking by 2030. Now they claim there will be a slight reduction by 2035. In other words, the regime proudly announced to the world that its CO2 output would continue to grow for at least 15 years. These policies caused U.S. energy prices to soar, driving U.S. industry to China as the regime pumped CO2 into the atmosphere at an unprecedented rate. Obama's Paris Accord policies destroyed about 500,000 U.S. jobs, including 200,000 in manufacturing, according to a study by the conservative-leaning The Heritage Foundation. That damage translates to about $20,000 in lost income for American families by 2035 and a reduction in GDP of over $2.5 trillion. No doubt the CCP was pleased. And yet somehow, the world was expected to believe that shifting CO2 emissions to China would help the climate. If the leaders of this process truly believed CO2 was pollution driving dangerous warming, it's not, they would all be horrified by the Paris Accord. Instead, they cheered. If nothing else, this proves those at the top know it's all a fraud. When I asked the CCP for comment in Paris, they sent one of their minions to follow me around and take pictures. This year, they also declined multiple in-person requests for interviews or comments. The big picture. American conservatives have long joked about watermelon communists. Green on the outside, red on the inside. The CCP and its allies appear to be taking a page out of that playbook. CO2 is not pollution, it's the gas of life exhaled by all living people. As Trump's first-term climate advisor William Happer of Princeton told me, CO2 is good for the planet, and people should be encouraged to make more of it. In any case, human emissions of CO2 represent a fraction of 1% of all the greenhouse gases present naturally in the atmosphere. There is no reason for Americans, Chinese, or anyone else to be concerned about their carbon footprint. And thankfully, Americans realize that, with polls showing most reject the man-made warming hypothesis. This year's summit faced unprecedented headwinds. Billionaire Bill Gates acknowledged climate change was not as big a threat as claimed. As documented by the Epoch Times, multiple peer-reviewed studies by leading scientists in major journals in recent years have completely undermined the settled science mantra. Trump, meanwhile, mocked the climate narrative at the UN General Assembly in September as the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. During CP30, Trump even suggested there may be ongoing investigations into a conspiracy to peddle climate alarmism. Before his second term, Trump said in a 2022 speech that decisively defeating the climate hysteria hoax must be one of the most urgent tasks for his MAGA movement and the country. For the first time ever, the U.S. government had no representation at the annual summit. The Trump administration refused to use taxpayer dollars to send or facilitate any official travel for this conference, which is dedicated to hamstringing the American economy and bankrupting the American people. A spokesman for the State Department told me. The Trump administration has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement and many other UN climate schemes, too. However, the U.S. government remains a part of the underlying 1992 treaty known as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The deal creates and underpins the whole process. This fact was noted by multiple prominent voices at COP30. In their view, it means that whatever COP30 and future COPs agree to remains binding on the United States. Sources involved in the administration's climate policy told me there has been talk of withdrawing from the UNFCCC. If Trump hopes to truly defeat the CCP empowerment scheme masquerading as climate policy, there is no other choice.